Good morning, beautiful people in the States, and good evening, beautiful people in India. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is episode 50, believe it or not. And we're joined by a repeat guest. His name is S.L. Kanthan, and he's based in Bangalore, India. And we're going to talk a lot about geopolitical situations. We will probably talk about some China, U.S. Dollar influence or lack of influence thereof, and just a lot of different topics. Ukraine, Russia, maybe. We're going to talk about the implications of the next 2024 presidential election in the U.S. and how that could potentially affect the multipolar world. Just a lot to really discuss with SL. Kind of a continuation from my previous episode 36. I urge all my listeners and viewers to go back to the episode 36 on your favorite podcasting platform or YouTube channel. And I just want to say welcome to the show and thanks for accepting the invitation again, SL.
Thank you so much, Nico. And it's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yes. And this is a great synergy. I've only known you for a few months, but like I was telling my audience before, I follow you on Twitter. I usually don't get on Twitter, but it's refreshing to see people try to navigate this complicated world of propaganda and info wars and everything else, and actually try to give people objective information so they can make those decisions on their own independently, away from the mainstream media and any other state control type narratives that we have to confront all the time. So it's really refreshing to see those types of perspectives, and that's what the forum really wants to shine. And again, our audience appreciates you again for accepting the invitation. And I just want to ask you, since the last time we talked, there's been a lot that's happened since May. We had some elections that happened in Turkey, and the result is Erdoğan is in office for another 5 years. And so I guess I wanted my audience to kind of know what is your perspective of Erdoğan winning the election again, and what does that mean for the multipolar world as far as Turkey is concerned?
Yeah, that was probably the most significant election in the world this year, because Turkey is a very strategic country, just in terms of location. If you look at Turkey, it's probably the most strategic in the world. It's right in between Europe on the left and the Middle East on the right. And just above Turkey, about 100 miles away, is Ukraine and Crimea, Black Sea, Russia. And on the south is the African continent, and it's sandwiched between Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. So it's very crucial. And it belongs to NATO, one of the few non-white countries that belongs to NATO. And it's a Muslim country. So it's very strategic, and the U.S. really, the deep state of the U.S., So by the way, so whenever I say the U.S., and I say a lot of bad things about the U.S., so it's not about the American people, so I'm talking about the deep state.
No doubt. No, we get it. We get it. No, you're not offending anybody in my audience. So.
So it's the rulers behind the curtain, So they try to stage, they basically blatantly supported the opposition guy, and the CIA has a lot of front groups, with beautiful names like the National Endowment of democracy, blah, blah, and they all supported the opposition team. And the opposition guy was very pro-NATO, very pro-US, and very much against Russia, and he lost. And Erdoğan it's his fourth election, and he won. And so during the election, his minister said, if somebody in Turkey is going to be pro-US, then that person will be considered a traitor. Okay. So the US made a big faux pas in poking its nose in Turkey's election and trying to rig the election, and it's been like that since for decades. The U.S. always had a very good control over the Turkey's military, and they just had all these the series of the puppet leaders, and if they do something that the U.S. doesn't like, they would make a phone call to the military, and the military would stage a coup. So it's been like that for decades. And then came Erdoğan, and then the military was also very secular. I've been to Turkey 15 years ago, and it was very westernized, like beautiful dance clubs, amazing DJs, lots of women in skirts and dancing, and plenty of alcohol. And you'd be so believe that it's like a Muslim country, was very westernized. But the problem there was the secular people. They were only like a fraction, like they're very well educated, the liberal, westernized, and they would watch all the NBA sports on their satellite TV. They would speak English, blah blah. But then there were like a lot of the segment of Turkey who were like, the lower middle class, the working class, the religious ones, and they were kind of marginalized. So then came Erdoğan. He was like populist. He won all the middle class vote, the women's vote, the religious vote, and he became very popular. And so Turkey, for a long time, wanted to join the European Union. So the Turkish people, they sort of, a lot of them, they're like, oh, we're not the Arabs, we're not the Persians. We're kind of a special kind of Muslims. We really belong to the West. We are more European. That's what they thought, So they tried to join the EU for decades. Nothing happened. So then Erdoğan, he started to figure out that the world is changing, and he needs to also look to the East, because he was just gonna, stay a puppet of the West, and it's not going anywhere. So he started leaning towards Russia, China, the Middle East. Then the US got mad. So in 2016, the US had tried to pull the trick that it had been doing for decades. So the CIA tried to stage a coup. And the story is that Russia's Putin, he found out about the coup, and he made a phone call to Erdoğan just like 15, 20 minutes before it was supposed to happen. So he called and said, don't leave the hotel. And they're planning a So then the coup was stopped, and Erdoğan did a very clever thing, and so he had this huge, the grassroots, the movement of people in the mosques all over Turkey. So he sent text messages to all the people around the country saying, but there is a coup and you guys have to rise up. And the people did, and the coup was stopped. And since then, Turkey has been leaning a lot towards Russia. And in 2018, Turkey wanted to join Brics, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So the bottom line is it's a big loss for the US to have lost a very strategic partner. And now Turkey helped Russia have a gas pipeline that comes under the Black Sea. Turkey buys Russia's, missile defense system. Mm-hmm. And to make it worse, the last 2 years, the U.S. and Wall Street, they've been waging a war on Turkey's lira, the currency. So it has lost like 50-60% of its value, So the Washington, D.C. folks, they only know one thing, to beat the people up and to force them into submission, But it's becoming less and less effective, as we've seen with Russia sanctions, the trade wars against China, the U.S. Bullying of Saudi Arabia, like Biden, he said, we are going to make Saudi Arabia the pariah, Terrible, terrible foreign policy, There's no such negotiation, sweet talking, to give some carrots, to find a win-win. No, it's all like we're going to beat you up, So, and now, so we're not quite sure if Turkey wants to join BRICS right now. They're kind of playing it under the radar. But about 20 countries have shown interest in joining BRICS, So this is like a revolution of the global South, the developing countries. They are basically standing up against the Western, hegemony, And so they're all sick of the endless wars, the weaponization of dollar, and just the bullying. What the U.S. has been doing in Ukraine, trying to start World War III. There was like absolutely no need for that, And so, and then what really was the last straw was when the U.S. and the European Union, they stole like $400-500 billion of Russia's foreign exchange reserves, So the way the system works is the rest of the world, they have to work hard to earn the dollar and the euro, because that's how all the trades have been done. It's one of the benefits of the U.S. Winning World War II. So then all these countries, so like when Russia sells oil, gas, coal, wheat, whatever, Russia gets paid in the US dollars or the euro. And they cannot store that money in the Russian bank. So if Russia earns, $50 billion by selling oil, they have to put that $50 billion in the U.S. banks, and then so this gives the U.S. extraordinary power over the rest of the world. Because then the U.S. says, if you don't behave exactly, how I tell you to, well, I'm going to lock up your bank account. Okay, so you lost your $50 billion. So Russia lost like 400 to 500 billion dollars worth of foreign exchange reserves. So the rest of the world saw this. They go, "Oh my God!" So, but this could happen to us too. If we don't bow to the U.S., they're going to steal all our money. So since then, there's been a huge de-dollarization effort. And that's the prime, the motivation that pushed all these countries towards Brics. And the rumor, or what they're saying, is that in the Brics meeting next month, like in August, they're going to come up with a gold-backed Brics currency. Mm-hmm. So that, at least for the Brics members, when they buy and sell goods and services with each other, they don't need a US dollar. Okay, and they're going to use gold-backed currency. And what is the dollar backed by? By the U.S. Military. Mm-hmm. And the petrodollar. Because from 1945 until 1971, the dollar was backed by gold. There were supposedly all this gold in Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. So, so if you had a dollar, that was the same as having some gold. And the U.S. waged war in Korea, Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. And they just printed way too much money. So in 1971, so Richard, hey guys, sorry, whatever dollar you have, it's not worth anymore, nothing, So then it's been the fiat currency, meaning the U.S. can print whatever it wants, and all of the commodities in the world, like especially oil. So Saudi Arabia, it played a very key role in propping up the U.S. dollar, So basically, but you can say that the dollar used to be backed by gold, and then it became backed by Saudi oil. Mm-hmm. So if, that's why the U.S. has a huge military base in Saudi Arabia. So it's not to really to protect Saudi Arabia, but to make sure that the Saudis don't start selling oil for Chinese yuan or whatever, So, but that's it's sort of like the mafia, like the system, it's like the racket, but it's not going to last very long, because a few months ago, the UAE, which is like one of the large producers of oil, it sold some oil to a French company in Chinese yuan, and then the French company sold it to China in yuan. So like this was the petro yuan, And now if you look at my country, India. So it was buying oil from Russia with the rupees. That's our currency. But then, well, India is not a huge manufacturing thing, So Russia gets all these billions of rupees, but it doesn't know what to do with it, So if you had the Chinese yuan, well, you can buy Chinese products, right? And they can sell you whatever you want, right? And they are the king of manufacturing. But what can Russia buy from India? Not a whole lot. So said to India, guys, we are your friends. We really like you, but you have to start paying us in Chinese yuan. And well, India has a lot of conflict with China, right? But they were still forced to say yes. All right, okay. So we will pay for the oil using Chinese yuan. So a lot of countries around the world, like Brazil, is now selling a lot of raw materials to China, and they are accepting yuan. And but Argentina just paid back the IMF loan in yuan because they ran out of the US dollar. So in the old days, so what happens is when a country runs out of the US dollar, they go begging to Washington, D.C. They go, oh, so we need some dollar. And then the US, the corporations would swoop in and they would say, okay, so if you want some US dollars, you have to sell your gold mine, copper mine. You have to, sell your banks, with this corporation, that corporation. So they would buy the whole country for pennies on the dollar, and they would use the euphemism called reforms, privatization, So they would say, man, well, your economy sucks because you're too socialist. What you need is some hardcore capitalism. So to privatize your whole nation, sell it to the American corporation. So Monsanto can buy all your lands, and Citigroup can buy all your banks, and McDonald's can buy all your, food companies, blah, blah, So, but now these companies have these countries have a second option. They can go to China. They would say, hey, China, well, listen, so why don't you give us a better deal, And China is, so it doesn't do the privatization scheme, they will get some good deal, but they are a lot better than the U.S. in terms of the deals, So, like if you look at the African countries, China has built thousands of kilometers of railways, highways, and they come build, dams. They provide satellite TV to thousands of remote villages in Africa. They build the hospitals and schools and stadiums, and the Africans, they love China, So, but China is not like an angel, but relatively speaking, compared to the US, they do things that really change people's lives, The US will come and say, oh, we will spread the LGBTQ propaganda to make your country more fair, and see, wouldn't that be so great if all the gay people in Africa are free to, for men to dress like women? Isn't that wonderful? Man, what do you want? Like, do you want, uh, water, electricity, homes, or do you want gay rights? So this kind of fluff stuff, and they go, oh, democracy, we'll bring you democracy. What good is a democracy? There's no democracy in the world. The people just fight.
But to
So
go
you
to your point, a lot of the culture war stuff is to avoid the economics of the class war, because that's why I don't even engage in the culture war stuff anymore, regardless of what side you're on in the culture war, because even under that premise, gay people, trans people, black people, anybody that's so-called marginalized, all need the electricity, running water. So once you take care of all that stuff, then we can discuss all the other stuff. But that's why they use it, because it's distractive, because it's to avoid the essential issues that we're dealing with.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's like, man, and then Barack Obama, black guy, and he goes to Africa, and he tells the people, hey guys, listen, if like everybody in Africa wants a big home and a car and the air conditioner, then the whole world will boil over. Okay, that's the phrase. I'm like, man, you guys in America are like, 4% of the world's population, and you use like 30% of the world's, the energy,
Mm-hmm.
and the average American uses like 40, 50 times as much, fossil fuel as, the average African.
Mm-hmm.
And like 500 million people still don't have access to electricity. 500 million, and this guy, he goes and preaches about climate change, and the IMF, World Bank, Europe, the US, they're all trying to block the progress for the African countries, and but like in Africa, they have plenty of natural resources. They have so much oil and gas and farmland. They could be like a really, really rich continent, but it's so poor because of the Western imperialism. Like they find all kinds of ways to stop the growth of the African countries.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so going back, the president of Kenya recently gave a speech, and the whole, the audience, full of the African leaders, they all stood up and they gave him a standing ovation for like minutes, and he said, why should we trade in the US dollar? Okay, so if one African country is going to buy something from another African country and they're going to sell, why do we need the US dollar? Well, if we're going to buy something from the US, let's use the US dollar. But if we're going to trade amongst ourselves, there's no need to use the currency of some other country far, far away in the world, And it's so basic. If you think about it, it's like very logical, but this has been the trick that the West has used for decades and is a very sophisticated, form of the colonialism and imperialism. And the global South is finally waking up, and it's trying to remove the shackles and be able to progress and to focus on, the development. Because if you really think about it, this century could be the century of the African nations and the Asian countries, right? They have been poor for like 500 years because of the European the colonialism. And finally, they have the opportunity to have electricity, to build roads, to have jobs, to build schools and the hospitals, and to make their own scientists and engineers. Why shouldn't they have all the things that the rest of the world has? So this kind of the paradigm shift that is happening all over the world, and the Washington D.C. folks are trying very hard to preserve the American century, and that's why we're now we're going towards World War III. So rather than finding out a way for all of us to be prosperous.
I have quite a few questions. I wanted to go back to when we talked about Turkey some, and just I wanted to get a clarification. Turkey is a NATO member, correct? Is Turkey part of the European Union?
No.
And why is that? What is? I guess what is the reason behind that? Because I know Turkey has been a NATO member for like decades, but why doesn't the same apply for the European Union? And what relationship do those two corpses have, the NATO and the European Union?
Sure. Okay. So NATO is basically the military arm of the U.S. So NATO is basically the U.S. Okay, it's basically a branch of the U.S.
The European branch of the United States.
And so regardless of all the euphemism, they say we're all friends and the allies. There's no such thing as, like an ally. Okay, there's only one boss, and that's America. And the European countries are vassals, And so NATO's, one general said when so NATO was first formed, he said the goal of NATO is to keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. The Russians out, but Germans down, and Americans in. Okay, so it was basically a tool to control Europe and to maintain the American empire, and so they were able to get Turkey in because of the strategic location that we mentioned before. So it's on Black Sea. On the north is the Soviet Union. South is Turkey. And in the 1960s, in the beginning, the U.S. put the nuclear weapons in Turkey. And then the Soviet Union said, really? So you're going to put the nuclear weapons like 150 miles away from our border? Well, we are going to put the nuclear weapons so right close to the U.S. in Cuba, right? So that was the Cuban the Missile Crisis. So what JFK did was to negotiate, saying, okay, so we will remove the nuclear weapons from Turkey, and you back off from Cuba. But to save the face, the U.S. government didn't tell the Americans that they removed the nuclear weapons from Turkey, because then they would look weak in the public. So Turkey has always been a very crucial part of the containment of the Soviet Union and now Russia. And the U.S. also used Turkey as the logistical the hub to wage a war on Syria and Libya. So Turkey has a border with Syria, and there's a huge U.S. military base. So in 2011, what the U.S. did was to train the jihadists. Okay, so the U.S. made a deal with all these other countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Jordan, and they all created this the Afghanistan, the Mujahideen Part 2. So they would bring in all these the jihadists, the terrorists from all over the world. They would go to Turkey and Jordan. Those two countries, they basically sandwich Syria. On the right side is Jordan, and on the northeast is Turkey. So these the jihadists would be trained by the CIA, and they would get all these American weapons, American dollars, and they would sneak across the border into Syria, and they would start shooting soldiers, the police. They would have suicide bombers and all kinds of stuff, So, so, so this was one of the reasons that Turkey's economy also started to go down, because millions of refugees from Syria, they went to Turkey, and then from Turkey, they went to Europe, So, but this created a huge mess. It was bad for Turkey, bad for Europe, and for Europe, So they always, they held this, the carrot to Turkey, So you be a good puppet, you can make, some money out of NATO, and someday you can join the EU, and you can be one of those special the Muslims who can be part of the white family. Well, guess what? So the Europeans are wonderful people. I don't have anything against them, but they can't, they cannot just accept a Muslim country with 80, 90 million people, because once you become a part of the EU, there is no border, right? So then you have like tens of millions of Turkish people going into Europe. And, it's just, you cannot really mix people up. This whole, the multicultural stuff has a lot of limits, So like if you have a few number of the immigrants, they'll be able to assimilate, and they'll be able to become a part of the nation, But if you bring in a whole bunch of other people, people start to, to fight, like you see in, France, they brought in these millions of people from the old, the colonies, like Morocco, Algeria, and so you can blame the French people, you can blame the immigrants, but the bottom line is they're not mixing, they're not getting along with one another. the immigrants and their families, they live in the poor neighborhoods. It's basically like segregation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody wins. The French people don't win, and the immigrants, they don't win because they only get to do the low-wage jobs. They get discriminated. They don't feel, the Turkish people, millions of people, they went to Germany in the 19, to do the blue collar job. And after 40, 50, 60 years, they don't feel like Germans, right? So they can be like a third generation Turkish German. But a lot of the German people would say, I'm sorry, you're not German. You are a Turk. So it's like a lose-lose situation. So, but Turkey is not, will never become a part of the EU, and the Europeans cannot accept them. And it's so now Turkey is having, and the U.S. has really screwed up its relationship with Erdogan, and the world is changing. It's a multipolar world. If you look at the share of the U.S. GDP of the world, it's only like 24% of the world's GDP, and that is also only possible because the U.S. is able to print dollars like there's no tomorrow, right? So, but just in the last 1 month, the U.S. debt went up by $1 trillion in 1 month. Okay, for the rest of the world, they have to work their asses off for years to make $1 trillion, right? And the U.S., the Federal Reserve guy, Powell, he sits before the computer. He goes 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, and voila, we have $1 trillion. So this is bad for the world, and it's also bad for the U.S.
It's something interesting you brought up, and it's something I've always thought about. Is you've obviously, you're an expert in this field when we talk about the geopolitical landscape, and like I said before I interacted with you, I don't think I'd ever heard of this word used to the degree that is being used now, multipolar. But from my personal perspective, I like to see the world as a conglomeration of people without boundaries. And this may be the idealistic Kiko, like because I have friends from all over the world. I've never seen the world as boundaries. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at earlier when you were talking about the immigration from the Turks, the immigration from some of the former colonized peoples of Africa, Northern Africa especially, and even Sub-Saharan Africa going to France. And just so people can know the situation about the riots, because you posed a question this morning on Twitter about why are these riots happening like this, or what's the cause of them. If you all go back to episode 32, my former colleague Jihad Gubin from Cameroon, his dissertation is all about this conflict that's happened, this imperialistic relationship between France and the former colonized countries, Algeria, Tunisia, all these different places. And he specifically talks about the Ben Louisa, which is basically the whole, it's not a suburb, that's a simplistic way of seeing it. But basically, like SL was saying, these people have sort of been put in a ghetto, and there's no really hope or opportunities. And they've been stuck in this position for years, and the tensions have risen. Some of it's racism, some of it is just poverty, but there is a relationship that's been there for a long time. These riots have been going on for decades. And the reason why I brought up Gerard is because his dissertation documents these series of riots that have happened. And so this series that's happened recently is just a continuation. And so I urge people to follow the episode 32, starting at minute 28. And that's when he goes into detail as to why we're in the situation we're in right now in France, which is kind of cool because that interview we did was about 3 or 4 months ago. So we're doing things before it really happens in real time, which is cool. But I was thinking about the boundary aspect and where does the multipolar world fit into this idea of, I guess, not getting rid of boundaries, but does it facilitate the possibility of there being more of a flow of communication, of kinship, of love with fellow countries? And I guess that's what you were getting at in the first episode about this not going into war at the first push of a button, but negotiation, communication.
Right. Yeah. So the world is ruled by some very, very powerful people. Okay, and we don't get to see them, like, or sometimes we see them in the background, and we don't know that they are in charge. So, and they would thrive on chaos and divide and rule, right? Because if you have peace, if you have knowledge, and then you start to think about what's happening, right? And they don't want that. They want to keep busy. They want to keep your mind busy. They want to have all these shock and awe, so you cannot think. So we're just caught in perpetual crisis mode, right? So we had the 9/11, I mean, I personally don't believe the official the narrative.
I don't either. So, yeah, same here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, man. So you have to be like, okay, anyways, right? But it's and then what happened, right? I mean, you freak out, right? I mean, when you freak out, you just succumb. You just so give away your freedom, the liberty, and you're ready to accept with all kinds of draconian measures, right? I mean, COVID. Oh my God, COVID! As if the coronavirus. I mean, the virus has been around for millions of years, okay, and our body knows how to fight. You don't need all the lockdowns, But but see what happened in 9/11. The first thing that happened was the Patriot Act, okay, and it was the opposite of patriotism. It basically allowed the deep state to spy on everyone, every American.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, emails you send, all your phone calls, with text messages, whatever, everything is under surveillance. And so if it were not for the 9/11, people would not like that. They would be like, "What are you talking about? You want to listen to my phone calls? No freaking way!" But if you have this, I mean, the crisis, people will accept anything, right?
Absolutely.
And then the second thing that happened was the destruction of the Middle East. You just go and kill 1 million Muslims. But if you didn't have the 9/11, so you cannot just go and kill 1 million Muslims, but would take over the oil revenue, and and then to spend trillions of dollars. Okay, it was basically a massive wealth transfer from the middle class Americans to the top 0.1%. Okay, so the U.S. spent like $7 trillion, $8 trillion bombing shepherds, like in Afghanistan. Okay, and they don't even make $1 a day and you drop a $1 million bomb on them. You know, it was a scam, huge scam, right? And then the drugs, and as you can go online and you can see soldiers of the U.S. and NATO protecting the poppy fields in Afghanistan. Okay, so somebody made billions of dollars selling, heroin to the world, right? The opioids, and then one of the backlash was a lot of Americans got addicted to the opioids and the heroin, which now has led to fentanyl. Right? Mm-hmm. So, so it's like the domino effect, right? And we're not able to think, And then there was the COVID. Oh, so we need to lock you down. We need vaccine passport, and we have this the technology called the mRNA, which is basically a gene therapy, And there's a speech by one of Bayer's the board of directors, and he gave a speech. I don't know if you've seen it, and he goes, this gene therapy would not have been accepted by the world if it were not for COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking, but see, but this is what happens with, the crisis, because then the brain, it gets into the fight or flight mode, and you cannot think properly, Same thing with the Russia war, right? So they basically provoked Russia, and what they don't say is like 1 month before, so Russia's invasion, there were like 120,000 Ukrainian soldiers and the Nazis on the border of Donbass and Crimea. Okay, so they were ready to invade, So, I think Putin should still have stayed inside and just, fought them. But he had no choice, So, because if I stand outside your house, right, 5 guys with guns. So are you going to say, well, I cannot be the first guy to shoot. I'm going to wait for the 5 guys to...
Right.
And then, you're not going to say that.
Mm-mm.
You're going to say, hey, I have my family and my children, and these but thugs are, standing outside with a gun, and I'm going to shoot at them first,
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, but this now has crossed, and now it's just like the same thing as the 9/11, but only worse, right? So this war serves the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the purposes, So one is, of course, war is very profitable, So like that's the first, the easy part. The second part is, of course, billions of dollars, Or a lot of people are taking, the commission, okay? So when Biden signs a bill saying we are sending $10 billion to Ukraine, you can bet that only like maybe 2-3 billion will finally go to the Ukrainian people, right? Mm-hmm. So 70% of the money is going to go to the middlemen, and you see all these the Ukrainian, the oligarchs and their children partying in Cyprus, Greece on big yachts, and they drive like Maserati in Poland, So there are like a lot of the 0.1% of the Ukrainians, they're making billions of dollars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the regular guy who makes like $150 a month, with $200 a month. They're the guys who are were sent into the meat grinder, to go fight Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so this is another the crisis, and this is also a very good way for the U.S. To deindustrialize the European nations,
Mm-hmm.
like especially Germany, And there's a guy named George Friedman, and he's the founder of Stratfor. Stratfor is like a very, very highly influential think tank that's used by the CIA and the military, the American military. So he gave a speech in 2015, I believe, and he laid it out so blatantly, okay? And so you can search for that on YouTube. So he goes, the primordial interest of the US is to make sure that Germany and Russia don't come together. Okay.
Wow.
So, yeah. So because the Germans are very smart people, okay, and that's the whole purpose why World War I was started, to stop the rise of Germany, and they're very, very but technologically very smart. Now, but think of the universe where Germany has very good relationships with Russia, okay, and they're like match made in heaven. It's like a rich guy marrying a beautiful woman. Both are very happy. So Germans have all the brains, the technology, and the Russians have all the energy and the natural resources. And those two could be like the dynamic duo, and the US doesn't want that, because the US wants only one superpower, and that's me, So, so like if you look at Germany, it's like a very, very unique case, and they have what is known as, Mittelstand, which is the small, medium family businesses, So in the US, like you see all of the economies are basically based on the coastal, right? It's basically New York and California. So New York has the finance, and California has the technology. And the Middle America is really suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the Rust Belt area, like like you start with the Mississippi River, you start at the top, you go down, and they're all now dying towns.
Mm-hmm.
And these towns used to be so great in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and they had thriving manufacturing, like in Gary, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best in the world. It was known for its steel industry, and people would fly from all over the world to see, wow, let's check out Gary, Indiana. Okay, and now you go to Gary, Indiana, it's death everywhere, right? Like beautiful churches are now completely abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
Streets, warehouses, factories. It's like somebody bombed Gary, Indiana, and it's just like poverty, like all over the Middle America,
Mm-hmm.
But in Germany, so like they had this like really amazing stuff, So like in the US, if you ask somebody, hey, why is the Middle America dying? They would say, yeah, well, that's globalization. We can never compete with the Chinese. So, well, obviously, the manufacturing is dead, and these people, so they make it sound like so natural, right? But
Exactly.
you go, yeah, but you go to Germany and you drive away from Berlin, to all these uh, the rural towns, which would be like Gary, Indiana, or some small town in Ohio, or like in Tennessee, and you would think, oh, I'm in some rural area. They're all probably very poor people. And then you go, they have like beautiful towns, and they are selling products to the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's pop. There'll be like one guy, yeah, my great great grandfather in 150 years ago, he started this. Okay, so I have a bad German accent, but right? It'd be like, yeah, we've been doing this for 150 years, and we make these amazing little bolts and nuts that nobody in the world can make. And we make $400 million a year. And we have the same employees. All our employees, they work with us until they retire. We're like a big. So they have this like amazing of a system, where small, medium business people can have, uh, you know, there's so much. I mean, pride in having your own, business, and especially that's been around with your family for 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 years, and it's such a beautiful thing. And you have a sense of a family, so there are like 60 people who work in your business, and you're like a big family, and you would take care of one another, and you live in a little beautiful but peaceful small town, so that's a good system, that they have going.
Mm-hmm.
uh, they and that system can work only if you have cheap oil, cheap gas, cheap coal, cheap natural gas. You have good transportation, right? Because if you're far away, so you need good roads, good transportation, good electricity. And now, thanks to, I mean, so first of all, this whole like, the climate scam. It's like a bunch of nutcases,
The
So
Greta
they've
Thunbergs of the world.
religious fanatics, like but they don't even understand science. They don't know anything, and it's just a narrative. Like we're living in the 14th century, and you have to deal with some peasants who shriek that the Jesus is coming in the next 50 years, and we're all going to die, mad people. So these the climate people, they shut down all of the nuclear power plants in Germany, over the last decade. And then they raised the taxes on the carbon, so carbon is like the new Satan, for these these people are so dumb. I cannot. Oh my god, So we should do a separate, the podcast on
That's
this.
so funny. No, I don't
Like,
like, but the thing about that, I definitely I think there's some validity to climate concerns, but I definitely get where you're going because I followed your posts and stuff on Twitter. I still don't want, I don't want to get a thing like that because I feel like that would distract a lot of people who are looking for stuff, because I
okay.
think that's a whole narrative in itself. Like you said, it's all about narrative control, and I definitely don't want to get involved with that because
So Okay, so basically, going back to Germany, this the energy crisis uh, uh, is totally destroying the Mittelstand, the small medium business, which is the backbone of the German economy, and this could destroy Germany forever. You know, so but Germany is the powerhouse of the whole of Europe. You know, if Germany gets deindustrialized, the whole Europe becomes a developing nation. You know, in 2007 and 2008, if you look at the European Union, the EU, its GDP was actually larger than that of the US. It was actually about 10% larger in 2008. Fast forward 14 years, by 2022, the US economy was 50% larger than the EU. You know, so and the Russia war is another one of those the crisis that fries short circuits people's brain, and elites are bringing in radical transformation of the world in this the shock and awe mode. So the losers will be Russia, the losers will be Germany, the losers will be Europe, and now the US is also trying to bring NATO into the Asian part, So, but NATO wants to open up a branch in Japan.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah. And these are psychopaths, rather than saying, let's all work together, to make everybody rich, hey, the US, the people came from Europe, we're all families. We want the Europeans to be successful. We want the Russians to be successful. We want the Chinese to be successful. Let's all work together. No, so they want the Russian war now. And then, so we can talk about that separately. And then, like after the Russian war, they're planning, they're laying the groundwork for a big war with China. So the U.S. is building 4 new military bases in the Philippines. It's rearming Japan. The U.S. loves India now. So you must have seen it. They're like, oh, India, we love you. You're so wonderful. We will sell you drones. We will use your ports for the U.S. Navy. We will help you spy on China. And someday you can fight and would die for us, just like all of the Ukrainians are dying for Russia. And all these Indians.
You never, you're spot on, though. And I don't, it's just like you said, I think these people have been so short-circuited that the political delusion that the amount of political delusion that we have in this country is just insane. And just the hypocrisy. I can't believe that these educated people apparently, and that's why I sort of doubt. I don't even use educated in that sense anymore when we talk about university versus non-university, because I've talked to so many people over the past few years without any sort of university degree to have a way better sense of the world and the economy and stuff than people who have gone to the university. So I don't even know if that's even a factor at this point, or if it is, it's definitely the gap is narrowing, because the university in itself has its own sets of contradictions because it's tied to the political system and all the infrastructure. So in a way, it's just you graduate, but then it's like, so go back into this same system that's never going to change and just perpetuate the same cycle of toxicity and everything. So it's really no different than the mainstream status quo political system, the university system. The way it's becoming, professors are becoming less independent minded, less free thinking, and more about affiliations with corporations and narratives, and less about autonomy in the classroom, helping students grow to become like free thinking individuals. Is completely opposite now. It's
Yeah,
about controlling what people say and how to say it, as opposed to telling people, no, you have a way to interpret this world yourself based on your experiences.
I know. I mean, so like if I were to tell, one thing to, the Americans, man, so you guys need a second revolution. Okay, so
Absolutely.
you need to throw away this the corrupt system, with puppets. It's just like one puppet after another. 4 years, you switch between Democrats and Republicans. It's not changing. Okay,
No, it's
so
not.
you have perpetual wars. Wages have been stagnant. 50% of the Americans are left behind. The minorities are suffering like but never before. So nobody is doing well, right? I mean, the whites are not doing well, the blacks are
Mm-mm.
not, the Mexicans are not doing well. You have the crumbling, the infrastructure. Uh, 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 I mean, so student debt. As young Americans have 1.6 trillion dollars of debt. Okay, it's not the way they're going to be able to start a new life. And then at the same time, the U.S. debt just went by $1 trillion in the last 1 month. Okay, so I mean, if they can just print money, why do Americans would need $1.6 trillion of debt to get a good education? You know, and why don't you have manufacturing jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Right? People are working at McDonald's and KFC. Why can't they be working at Ford and GM? So it's like a scam. Okay, so there is a big scam going on. You know, so you need some. Uh, it, so I mean, so like forget the polarization. Okay, so don't be stuck in the liberals, conservative, Democrats, Republicans. It's like the biggest scam of the divide and rule.
Of course it is.
Yeah, so like, you know, I mean, so bring in Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and but Trump, so make a coalition, you know, and fight the deep state, fight big pharma, fight, the corporate influence. Uh, Forget about the perpetual wars. Like there should be only one America, one party. Because if you need, like the growth, like so if you want to say, I want to build bridges, I want to build roadways, I want to better the water system in the US, I want to create 30 million good paying jobs. Because it doesn't matter if you are a liberal Democrat, if you believe in gay rights or not, So forget all that stuff. Like, why do you need the party affiliation? So like if I say, hey, uh, so here is my plan, uh, to create 30 million solid middle class jobs, and we make America great. You don't need to know what my party is,
Mm-hmm.
whether I abortion or gay rights. Man, just shut the
Exactly.
You know, shut up and just, get the job done,
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, because if you just switch, I mean, because the world is changing a lot, okay? And a lot of Americans are being fed baloney about China collapse, China communist, China evil.
Oh yeah.
They're just, they're just working on their people, their cities. But their GDP goes up every day. The infrastructure. If you look at some videos, or if you but get a chance, you go to Shanghai, Beijing, it'll blow your mind away. So but learn the truth, and the U.S. I mean, we don't know the future. People are very stupid. But maybe Russia will fall. Maybe the Europeans will commit suicide. Maybe China will collapse. It's all possibilities in the world. But if you think if you think logically and mathematically, those chances are like 1%. Okay, so there is a 99% chance that China will soon be the number one economy. Russia is going to survive the Ukraine war. The Brics, the coalition, is going to take off. There's going to be a multipolar, multilateral world, and but there's a guy named Zoltan Pozsar. As Google him, Zoltan. He's a brilliant guy, and he's written 4 or 5 articles about the future of the world, the dollar, trade, and so on. And basically, but all of the privileges that the U.S. has experienced since World War II is going to, I wouldn't say fully end, but it's going to be much, much less. Okay. So if you are, if, uh, uh, if the U.S. elites are smart, they would prepare Americans for a future that is going to be very different, where the dollar is not the mighty king. The U.S. will not have 750 military bases in 140 countries. The U.S. cannot have just services job forever and just print trillions of dollars like there's no tomorrow. There's going to be a brand new world, and the U.S. needs to plan its the economy better, its foreign policy better. But think of a world where the U.S. is just one among the many countries, and but Americans have to work hard to earn dollar and not just slide the credit card, and they have to learn how to save, how to do manufacturing. There's a whole new world.
I I do have some questions before we leave, and we may be able to touch on one other thing briefly, but I'm still I'm not scratching my head about the multipolar world. I understand the premise of the multipolar world, but based on just stuff that you've written and just our previous episode, there are definitely blind spots with this whole conglomeration of the BRICS coalition. Like you said earlier, you alluded to the meeting that's supposed to be happening in August about this gold-backed currency. And I think in the first episode, you even now suggested that there could be other commodities back in this new currency, like lithium or any silver, whatever it may be. But it seems like that there's a hierarchy within the BRICS, the BRICS, because I don't hear South Africa mentioned as much. you've alluded to a lot of the deficiencies that India already goes through still. India has this weird standing with China. India has this, at least on the surface, it looks like a friendship with the US. And I don't know if India knows exactly what direction it wants to go into as far as being 100% committed to such a coalition like Brics. But would there be a threat to this multipolar world simply becoming more of a unipolar world if, let's just say, Russia comes on the positive end of this war and China continues to be China? Wouldn't that just be another hierarchy of China and Russia? And you have a bunch of global South countries under those two superpowers?
It's possible, and so that depends on the negotiations, right? So, because well, ideally, we should have a more democratic world, So the African countries should be able to negotiate better, and I hope they do. And but I think, it will happen naturally, So just like, so think if you have, like, say, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express, if you have 5 choices, they're all going to the best deal. They'd be like, well, but Kiko, so we have 0% interest rate for 2 years, the multipolar world, the US, Europe, China, Russia, they will all be calling India and Africa, Vietnam, Brazil, whatever. They will say, hey, so we have this deal, we will but not only but give you but $20 billion loan, but we are going to build this super highway between these 2 cities. So they have to sweeten up the deal.
Gotcha. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So yeah, that's a better way of looking at it. I get what you're saying now. Because there's definitely some things going on. You mentioned Turkey, and this idea of borders and geographics is really interesting because we talked with a couple of people about the Ukraine-Russia situation, how a lot is not made in the mainstream media or a lot of media in general about where Ukraine is strategically located within Europe. Second largest country in Europe, if you consider Russia a part of Europe. Me personally, I've never considered Russia a part of Europe just from afar, but just based on the way people are acting, just in this whole game, this NATO game and stuff, it's clear to me that Russia has always been viewed, at least for the last 100 years, as something different than the rest of Europe because it spans is transcontinental. I mean, it's Asia and Europe. I mean, you really can't define it as easily as you can Belgium or anywhere else. And Ukraine is in a situation where, I mean, it shares borders with Belarus, it shares borders with Russia, and Belarus is obviously related with Russia. They're not going to let the European Union like do what it wants to do. And then you have Poland, and then you have Western Ukraine has more ties with NATO, and Eastern Ukraine has very much Russian, you know, influence. I mean, a lot of the citizens are from Russia in Eastern Ukraine, so you have so much of this ambiguity going on. And as you mentioned before, the deep state has exploited this ambiguity when a lot of the people who aren't studying like geography, that's why geography is so important. Because I think if people had a basic sense of geography, these occurrences will make way more sense and people will be able to see the motive aspect of it a lot easier. But I think because the most Americans honestly are just so ignorant when it comes to geography, they don't understand why this stuff plays such a bigger factor into the situation.
Yeah, indeed, and so if you go back to the CIA documents, the declassified CIA documents from the 1950s, okay, so right after World War II, the CIA was recruiting Nazis from Ukraine, okay, to fight the USSR.
Mm.
And they brought in some Nazis to New York, and it's called the Operation Arrowwood or something like that, And so they've been working with the Nazis for a long time. And in the 1990s, so Brzezinski, one of the leading, the brain behind the Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, and he was the prime advisor to Jimmy Carter and to Barack Obama. He wrote a book called The Global Chessboard,
Mm-hmm.
And in 1998, he said, we have to bring in Ukraine, and that's how we are going to weaken Russia. So this plan has been around for decades, And like you said, if you look at the geography, you will immediately understand that without Black Sea, there's no Russia, okay? Because our ships cannot go. Our Crimea is the only warm port, and Russia's trade and the military. The Black Sea is the choke point, And so Ukraine's the Nazism was fed by the U.S. State Department, George Soros, and these guys. They spent billions of dollars on fomenting Nazism, and it's not like mild Nazism. Okay, so if you look at all of the Ukrainian the military. You would think you're watching a documentary of the Nazi Germany from the 1940s.
Yeah.
All these, so it's not just a swastika, so they have about 10, 15 different the Nazi, the logos, the symbols, So I had to relearn all of them, there is the skull and bones, it's called the Totenkopf. Then there is the SS Schutzstaffel or something like that. And then they have the Nazi cross, so many things. And and these guys have it all over their body, It's like pure Nazis.
I know,
And
it's crazy.
so crazy, And then so they were first, the U.S. media was like, there are no Nazis. And it was like, yeah, there are Nazis, but there are only a few of them. And then they're when you do some research and you find that in 2014, 2015, up to 2019, the head of the parliament was the founder of the Nazi group. The head of the National Guard was a big time but Nazi leader, blah blah blah. So it's like a hardcore Nazis, but then to hide everything, they put a Jewish leader at the top, because the people's brains cannot, they're the cognitive dissonance, they don't understand geopolitics. So yeah, and it's but basically Russia has killed about 90% of these the Nazis. So they were all in. The Mariupol, that was the Nazi center, the Azov battalion. Because maybe not, but 90. Okay, so maybe 70% of the best Nazi soldiers in Ukraine are dead. Okay, so the only people, if you watch the videos on the Twitter, the Ukraine is now forcing regular people. They go to the home, go to the malls, then they capture them, and these people don't want to fight.
I know, it's crazy. I've seen so many of these videos. It's absolutely, it's almost surreal.
Yeah. So just 1 second, please.
No, you're fine.
Sorry. So that was, I
No,
mean,
you're
the
good.
milk, we get milk at night. Yeah. And so what is, so they first said, oh, like we just need javelins, I mean, so but Ukraine had more javelins than any other country in the world. So like that was the U.S. plan. So if you have javelins, you can shoot down all the Russian tanks, all the weapons, and the war is over. So they sort of thought of how the Afghan, the Mujahideen, they beat the Russians with the shoulder-powered. The watching Rambo 3 or something like that. So they had the same plan. They said, yeah, it worked in Afghanistan, and we will just flood Ukraine with the javelin. So from about 2014 until 2022, the U.S. and the NATO, they trained, they selected all these the Nazis, because you need like some, strong the ideology, right? So in a war, so you need two things. So one is skills. Well, right, skills and weapons is one. But number two is the ideology. So you need like hatred, so much hatred to fight. Those are the best people. So that's why the U.S. loves Al Qaeda, Nazis, ISIS, because these guys will fight to death for $200 a month. It's like the best deal. Yeah. So so they had all these javelins, and I'm actually surprised. I don't fully understand, how Russia was able to get around the javelins, but somehow they managed. And then the US was like, oh, we need the Stingers to shoot down the Russian. And that didn't quite stop Russia. And they were like, we need the HIMARS. We have the HIMARS, like the missiles. To defeat Russia. It's the game changer. So whatever they did, if you go back and read the news media, it was always the new thing was the game changer that was supposed to defeat Russia forever. And then, but nothing happened with the HIMARS. Then they said, Storm Shadow. Oh, Storm Shadow, man, it's going to kill the Russians. End of story. Well, nothing happened. Oh, the Leopard tanks, the German tanks, you don't know, okay? One German Leopard tank is the same as 1,000 Russian tanks. Boom. Game over. Well, the Russians use really cheap drones, like, I don't know, $1,000, $2,000 drones. And they have this like fantastic, the camera, and it shows, how it goes and kills all the Bradleys from the US, the Leopard tanks from Germany.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's like a beautiful video. And it's like, starts from like, I don't know, 300, 400 meters. And you can see the video all the way up to the moment it crashes, and the Ukrainians, yeah. So it's like a waste, so now they have run out of everything, and now they're going to use the cluster bombs, okay? The cluster bombs is not to kill the Russian soldiers. It is to terrorize the civilians in the Donbas region. Okay, so this is like such a horrible war crime. So the U.S. is going to help Ukraine bomb hospitals and schools and the towns to kill men, women, and children. It's really horrible, And if this fails, I don't know, the nuclear war is the last option. It's so dumb.
So So this leads to another question, because I know we had a lot of topics. I threw so many topics at you, and I do that because I feel like if you have that, you can't have too many, because we can kind of just base it on the flow of the conversation, which is awesome. And so where does this presidential election here in the U.S. come into play? Does the result of who gets in have any influence on what direction the Ukraine-Russia war goes? And what can we be looking at a year and a half, 2 years down the road based on who's in office, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's very, very hard to fight the military-industrial complex, because the moment you say you want peace, a lot of people will say you are a traitor, you're weak, but both Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., so that JFK, if you listen to the peace speech, he was like the best president that the U.S. ever had, And if he had not been assassinated, the whole history of the U.S. and the world could have changed, why couldn't the U.S. Get along with the Soviet Union? It's so stupid, So they basically assassinated JFK, and then his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, he ran in 1968, and he was about to win. So he would have easily won the presidential election in 1968. And the same people who killed JFK also killed RFK.
And Malcolm and MLK, and
yeah,
the list goes on. Just any of the dissidents that were fighting against, the system, the deep state back then.
Right. So the same people also, they killed Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so no doubt about that. So don't go with the narratives about blah blah. It's just stories for the dumb people, and the same people they killed even John Lennon. Okay, I mean these people are so scared of peace. The peace is like them. They hate peace like psychopaths. So. But I think that if you have Biden, okay, there's the future of America is very bleak. I'm sorry, So so Trump is crazy, but at least he's right on wars. He doesn't like the perpetual wars, and I think Robert Kennedy Jr. It would be a very good choice because he's also mature in his thinking process. And he comes from a family that was assassinated by the military industrial complex and the CIA, So I think that I'm hoping they're not going to assassinate him as well. I don't think they have the balls to do it now. So I think that he would be able to fight to at least bring down, the temperature, and hopefully, because the U.S. needs to wake up. Okay, you cannot be the master forever. Okay, so go study history, go study the Dutch Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Portugal Empire, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Chinese Empire. They all come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
You are not going to be an empire forever. You have to understand that, and the more you kick people now, the more there will be the enemies who will want revenge in the future. So you need to make peace. You need to figure out a transition and focus on America. Build America. Make Americans rich, make America beautiful, build the cities. Have good children who follow the laws, who are not like breaking into stores and stealing stuff. Don't fill up the prisons with your own people. Don't have fat people all over the country. Figure out good food, watch good TV, but choose good politicians. Build America. Forget about wars. Forget about the empires. Like you don't need 700 military bases in 140 countries. You don't need to start wars with Russia, which has 6,000 nuclear bombs. Okay, you are not going to win against Russia. Okay, so like if you are on the verge of somehow defeating Russia, Putin will send nuclear bombs to New York, Washington, D.C., Florida, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. You can bet this is not a joke.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
Russia, so Russia is a civilization. So whatever nonsense that is, spread in the U.S. The media, oh, Putin dictator, Russians, poors, blah blah blah. These are just like really stupid things to say. So like if you're going to, if you have, so what is the best? The basketball team in the U.S.
Currently, the Denver Nuggets.
Okay, so like if you're going to play against the Nuggets, so you don't sit on your ass and but talk smack. Oh, the Nuggets! Oh my God, stupid! You see that? And that guy, he's so fat, and the other guy is going through a divorce, and the other guy, he does drugs. They're all stupid. No, you have to take it very seriously, And in geopolitics, you have to understand Russia. It's a 1,000 plus year old civilization. Okay, and they survived many attacks from Europe. They defeated Napoleon. They defeated Hitler. They defeated the British. And it's a civilizational state. Same with China. They've been around for the Chinese, the dynasty, the United China is over 2,500 years old. Okay, so they have wisdom that the U.S. doesn't have. Okay, so the U.S. is like a 14-year-old kid, who thinks he's the bomb. So you have to respect other civilizations and their wisdom, and so you have to figure out a way to live and let live. So forget the wars. Choose somebody like Robert Kennedy Jr. or even Trump. Forget the warmongering, because the world is going to change very, very rapidly. You need to evolve.
Yes, we had some comments from the first episode, and one of the people commented and said that I 100% agree. They were basically saying my premise was like spot on as far as not even participating in this process, this scam of a process we have here. Going to something you said about the lack of respect that ignorant Americans have towards other countries and their leadership. I think that that's a point. I think that's what people are deflecting to cover up the deficiencies of our system here. People know that we have a very flawed system. And even if you go back and listen to episode 1 with Martin Harpatine Wilson, who is from Spain, who currently lives in the US now, he talked about how after the Franco dictatorship ended in the 70s, how it's the same problem that they've had in Spain, where one ruling class just comes in each cycle and dominates and dictates everything. So how's that not a dictatorship that's continued? I mean, I believe that we live under a dictatorship here too. It's just called a red-blue dictatorship. It's not any different than the dictatorship that they throw on other countries. And besides, why are you worried about what other people are doing in those places when your own house is in crumbles, and I think that's what they do. They use other people, quote unquote, problems or perceptive problems to hide their own problems that they have. Me personally, I wish RFK would run as independent. I wish Trump would run as an independent, because that would upset the system that we have. But and I guess the issue I have with RFK or Trump, I don't agree with really their politics overall, but I do agree that they're better options than what we have. The deep state is obviously running the show now. I mean, Biden has no control. This is Obama, and whoever he's got in charge, the Yellings and all these people that have come from the former Obama administration, they're pretty much running the show, and Biden's just a demented puppet right now. I mean, he doesn't even know where he's at half the time. His son is doing crack in the White House, and it's absolutely crazy what's going on. I know you saw that meeting with Modi, and Biden talks about like the state secrets, talking about we can drop a bomb. I don't know what he was talking about. It's just gibberish, like typical Joe Biden gibberish. And the people in the room, like, did he really just say that about? He's talking about state secrets. And so this guy's running our country right now. Doesn't even know where he's at half the time. But I guess my issue with that is what happens after. Let's just say that RFK or Trump gets in. What happens after those people aren't in office anymore? Do we just go back to the same red-blue alliance again? That's the issue I have with it. How is there a potential to build outside of that deep state structure, which is the two-party system?
Yeah, it's yeah, I know, like I mean, Delhi's are like, you can have so many genders, you can have 20 genders, but you can have only two parties, Dude, why can't why can't the Americans have a third party? Why do you have to be trapped? It's either the left or the right. No, that's so bogus. So I
I know.
hope there is like,
And it's really a joke, honestly, because true leftists like myself, I consider myself like a libertarian leftist, but like a true leftist in the sense that war should never be on the table. But you have people who, I mean, I've exposed this so many times how the blue team is absolutely a joke. I mean, but they use a lot of the language that people use to sort of give them this perception. But it just shows how ignorant the country is. I mean, if it's sad to say that I'm 41 years old, and when I was in the protest with the George W. Bush administration before, like during 9/11, and then they justified the Iraq War and all this other stuff. Back then, when we were protesting in 99 and 2000, 2001, that those same Democrats are okay with war now. And I'm saying to myself, you guys, they're conservatives that are more anti-war now than Democrats, which is
I know.
absolutely crazy. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, man, so like, like you go look at the photos from the 1960s, it was all the leftists who were all against war, and now these people are like, yeah, let's fight Putin. Like, what happened to the progressives? It's like a brain swap.
But that's the strategy. That's what happens when you have a captured audience. When you capture everyone from socialists, communists, libertarians, all the way over, basically both parties have captured any group that they can, because that's all they have to choose from, or at least that's all they feel like they have to choose from. And they have these crazy rules. And if you follow some of the episodes, we talk about the things that go against third-party candidates and independents. I mean, you basically, a state like Tennessee, the Democrats and Republicans only need 25 signatures to get into any public office. But if you're a third party, you have to have at least 50,000 signatures. And that's just in my state. And a lot of the times, even if it's in a town or a city or whatever, you may not even have 50,000 votes. And so you still have to get that many votes because
What a
that's how rigged the system is.
what a clever rigged system.
And not to mention, for these people to even get on the ballot in certain states, they have to pay like millions of dollars to even get on the ballot. And when the other two parties are already on there by default. So you have just that, you have these things going on before they can even be viable candidates.
Yes. And they rig the primary. The DNC and the RNC are basically private corporations.
Absolutely.
And, and they select the candidates, and they know exactly who's going to win. There was like an email in the WikiLeaks, and like 1.5 years before the election in 2016, right? Yeah. So in sometime like like in June of 2015, the DNC guys were sending emails about how Hillary Clinton was going to win, and so they had already chosen her, and then it was just a matter of rigging everything. And Bernie was just like the controlled opposition,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So much.
I did have one more thing, because I know in the fall, deep into the fall, things are going to be heating up for sure. Just with all the currency issues, and hopefully we can kind of elaborate more after we hear more about this BRICS meeting in August. So maybe we can in September or even October and kind of pick up where we left off. But I'm curious. You mentioned COVID earlier. And we know that the response to COVID varied depending on where you were. Like it was completely different in Africa, for instance. Just talking to people there, talking to people in China, even not to live in China, the response to COVID was completely different than here. In Italy, it was different. I'm curious, what was the impact of COVID in India, and what was the governmental response to it in comparison to what happened here in the United States?
It was, it's very similar in the sense that, like before, the people in the cities are always more paranoid about germs. So if you go to the rural place, whether it's in China, India, nobody cares, and they're all happy. They don't wear masks. They don't know about vaccines, and they don't even know there was COVID. They're like, "What COVID? What are you talking about? We've just been living normal life, And then the city slickers are the ones that are like, I need with 2 masks, and it was, so for me, I was in China when COVID broke out, so
Okay.
it was in 2019. And I was surrounded by people who were coughing everywhere, I'm sure that I was exposed to COVID. Everybody was coughing. Restaurants, hotels, malls, taxi cabs. You sit in a cab, the guy, he coughs for like 20 minutes, and you're like surrounded by germs, And the amazing thing is I didn't get sick at all. I didn't even get like a sniffy nose. So I knew that I have a good the natural the immune system. Gotten a cold in like 15 years. As I use all my the natural stuff, but garlic, onion, like but things that but modern doctors do not believe in. So yeah, it's the same. Like, so for example, like if you go, to Africa, so most of the countries in Africa have a vaccination rate of like 4% or something, and the people just lead a normal life. they don't know about your paranoia. They don't know about boosters, vaccines, masks. Wash your hands 50 times. I'm like, what are you talking about? The virus is in the air. What the hell am I going to do? Wash my hands for 10 times a day. So yeah, it's the same. So in like a lot of these areas, the less you know, the better. You know, like this. The CNN, the reporter, she went to the villages in China, to see if people are all dying everywhere, and all the villagers are unhappy. They're all sitting around talking, having fun. They're like, yeah, but COVID, what? Oh, the flu? Yeah, we don't worry about the flu.
Oh wow. And this is where it supposedly originated from. That because I said it because I had some family members that they succumbed to COVID, they died from it, but they had very like bad health going
You're
in.
right.
But at the same time, I proposed something. I was telling my mom, and she made a comment which was crazy. She said, and this was at first when she was like pretty scared, but I kind of calmed her down because my parents they end up getting vaccinated and stuff. I didn't. But and I always thought it was a personal choice anyway. People decide what they want to do with their own body. But she said, son, it sounds like this was almost like meant to attack the most vulnerable people with the worst health. And I think that's the moment it clicked for her. Like this could have been something that was manufactured, and that was from someone that wasn't thinking like that before, but she was just kind of using it based on what she saw. Like the healthy people aren't dropping down like flies. It's the people who are already in bad health. And so it makes you wonder. And I don't think a lot of people wanted to get to that point because they don't want to believe that their governments are that sinister, that they would deliberately try to bring something in to kill lots of people. But that's always a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the things, so what is difficult, what is but not difficult to believe is just our psychology.
Mm-hmm.
So, like if you say, yeah, Stalin killed 50 million people, and the Chinese Communist Party, it kills 500 zillion people. The people will believe that. Oh, yes, very bad communists. So what, what is hard to believe is in your mind. So uh, like you said, something like but 95% of the people who died with or from COVID, they had what is known as the comorbidities. It's like people with diabetes, heart disease, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we never know what killed them. So is it just like they were already like but 90% but close to death, and then COVID was the 10%. Just push the person from the cliff. So, but how do you determine the cause, right? So, if like a person gets stabbed, shot, and run over by a car, how do you determine the cause of death? So I think so. For example, so. But like you, but never hear, like if you read the obituaries, they never say that the person died of flu. Okay, we always say this person died of old age, a heart attack, diabetes, but cancer. But the flu could have been the one that pushed the cancer patient to death. So like patient has cancer with a weak immune system, and he gets the pneumonia and the flu, and then he dies. but the doctors will never say he died of pneumonia or flu. They'll say he died of a cancer, you know. But if the person but COVID, then they would put the cancer death under the COVID. So there was a as to whether people died from COVID or people died with COVID. Right? And but those two statistics were just merged into one.
They did something similar, and I wasn't really I wasn't fully developed when this happened with the HIV AIDS epidemic in the early 80s to late 70s. It really started late 70s, especially San Francisco was pretty much the epicenter because there were reports. People didn't know exactly what it was back then, similar to this. And we know who was in charge of that even out in the 80s. I mean, and like I said, I mean, you can label people whatever you want to label them, but there's a common link between these two crises. And we know who that person is. And to me, it's not a coincidence that the same person who was over the HIV AIDS.
Fauci. Fauci. Oh, yeah.
And
oh, my God.
Because even when that came out, even when AIDS started to blow up in the 80s, the news reports would say they used to actually do the opposite. They were avoiding using the word AIDS. They would say anything else but AIDS. They would say, oh, they died of cancer, pneumonia, whatever, but they didn't want to say the A word. So it's almost like they did a reverse that they did back then. Like they used a whole different angle, which is pretty sinister if you ask me, because this guy's the same person, and people know I don't like this guy at all. I mean, you don't see him on TV like you did, because a few years ago he was all over television. People thought he was a hero. He's on Jimmy Fallon and all these shows, and he's like this big celebrity. I'm like, this damn charlatan, you know. And he's the same guy that thought you could get AIDS from sitting on a toilet seat. And so we're taking that advice from one doctor, you know what I mean? When you have all these other people saying, we disagree with this, but we're listening to the one figurehead that's part of the deep state, like, hey, this person knows all the answers. I don't know why people don't see that stuff a little bit clearer than that. Or are they just going to keep being duped each 2 to 3 years, it seems like to you? Is that what you see going down in the future? Just are people going to get any smarter from these crises, or are they just going to create different types of crises?
Yeah, there are, but two, you know, I think there are two possibilities, and there are about two realities. You know, so one type of people who get succumbed to this, the perpetual crisis. So their mind becomes really weak. You know, so for each crisis, they become more vulnerable, more hysterical, and more susceptible to propaganda and manipulation and the mass psychosis, you know. And then the second effect is the people become very suspicious, and their first reaction is bullshit. I'm not going to believe this, you know. So fortunately, it's like dividing the society into these two segments, and it's worse, because for the vulnerable people, the other side is very crazy and dangerous, you know, because they're like, oh my God, there's a real danger, but look at these stupid, reckless people. They just don't understand the danger, you know, and they're like freaking out. So it's yeah, I mean, it's really tragic.
But they've already changed the narrative, just like because you know, once the COVID narrative officially ended back in May, you know, because Biden said it ended in May. So everyone was okay. You know, the idiots who followed along with the narratives before were okay, like, okay, because this guy, this smart guy that's in office said that it ended, so obviously it's over with, because which is just crazy. But the news changed a lot because there was a part when they were talking about the unvaccinated, and they basically at one point they linked the unvaccinated label to the Trumpers and the conservatives. But once they realized that it wasn't just those people, it was a larger group of people that agreed with that. So they couldn't keep saying that anymore. It wasn't effective because obviously there were a lot of people who were just like, no, and had nothing to do with political affiliation whatsoever. But initially, that's what they tried to do, was use the political label. Unvaccinated means that you have to be a Republican, you have to be a Trump supporter, whatever. But that stopped working. And so that's what they do, is it takes them months to kind of filter that out. And then before you know it, you never hear about it again. That's how it's so effective, because they're never going to admit that they're wrong. They just completely stop talking about it. Just like they had the death ticker on there when people dying of COVID. All of a sudden, you didn't see that on the screen anymore.
Yeah. I mean, people don't see. I mean, okay. Say, for example, you don't believe in a religion, like say, but you've never been exposed to Hindus, and you look at the Hindu mythologies, it'll be like so funny for you. It's so it'll be like a story. It'll be like, ha ha ha. What? Okay, all right. I mean, it's either, so you can, but if you are a very religious Hindu, oh my God, those stories are real. You cannot laugh at them. This is like serious, right? So this is the key, So we have to not get attached to things to see the truth. Once you get attached to something, you lose objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say that I'm a Democrat, then you cannot see how crazy Biden is.
Exactly.
If you say I'm a Republican, but then you cannot see how crazy Trump is. So like all this, the propaganda, whether it's 9/11, COVID, Russia, China, blah blah blah. I mean, the climate change, gender, LGBTQ nonsense. You know, so like, if you just feel, so if you don't but think, but you just feel, and you have this obligation to go with the narrative, and you tell yourself that I am this, that I'm an American, I'm a Christian, I'm a Hindu, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican. These labels, they just box your brain.
Yeah.
Once you label yourself, you cannot see a lot of the propaganda.
That's an interesting observation, and I think it's hard to disagree with that. The labels have definitely been weaponized, and they don't stay the same either. I don't think people know exactly what they are anymore. I think social media has also been used in a way to you would think that the internet would open up people's minds, but in ways it's just simply redirected people's minds into their own biases. And so,
Yeah.
everything is working at play. Everything is working together. This intricate network that we call the deep state is very successful. And I guess the way we combat that is simply by we have to still open the lines of communication up to people. Because if we don't, we risk assuming that people are not gonna, or that they're never able to change. But we have to connect with people regardless, because we have people in our families like this that may not agree with us, but we still have to have a line of communication for that possibility. We just can't write people off. And I guess that would be my advice to anyone that's listening, because even people that we disagree with they're still being used too in their own way, even if we don't agree with them.
Yeah. I would say that, I would choose, I mean, uh, I mean, uh, uh, we learn to think in gray areas, fractions, So like, but rather than saying, but Trump is good or bad, like say, but Trump is 40% good in these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is 70% bad in those issues, So whatever the topic, it's but never a 0 or 1,
Right.
So nobody good, So once we learn to but think in fractions, but unfortunately, like you said, in social media, it's all like exaggerations and sensationalisms, right? And that really does a disservice to ourselves, because then we lose the ability to think but clearly. So we have to think in fractions. I think that's going to be my new slogan: think in fractions.
I like that. I like that a lot. And SL, I want to talk long with you, but we've gone over 2 hours again. And
Wow,
I
really?
know it doesn't even seem like it because it's such an organic conversation. And I feel the positive energy. And I know my audience will appreciate it too, even though they may not agree with everything that we say. I think that there's so much that we can think about, contemplate, learn about, and that's the whole point. I want to tell that to my listeners again and viewers. It's not about agreeing with everything we say. It's not about disagreeing with everything we say, but there has to be value in this conversation, and that's what I advise people to do. Take value from what you hear, even if you don't agree with it all the way, because that's for you to connect those pieces of the puzzle together. That's the whole point. But don't write people off. Stop discounting people every time you disagree with them about something. Engage with the people. That would be my advice going forward. What are some of your final words? Do you have any departing words, SL, before we go today?
I would say think in fractions.
Yes. I like that. I guess I'm going to be watching your Twitter now for that slogan to pop up. That's funny. But SL, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to keep following you on Twitter. I'm going to link all your information into the episode description. This wonderful episode 50. SL Substack. If you haven't read any of his Substacks, I suggest y'all read them. We didn't really get into those today because we did have a lot of topics we just kind of threw out there and we just kind of went with the flow. But his 10 benefits of de-dollarization, secrets of China's economic growth. There's just a plethora of information on SL Kanthan Substack and also his Medium. I don't know if they're the same articles or not, but I'm just going to link everything in the description. And you have a YouTube channel that you don't upload as much on, but it's Mr. Geopolitics, and I'll link that as well because there's a really good China video where he explains he kind of demystifies this idea of China just not knowing what it's doing. China doesn't understand economics, and it just debunks all these stupid labels, like he said earlier about communist China, and just people are still living back in the 60s. I mean, this is a completely different society now, and I think it intimidates the West because there is planning involved and a lack of planning happening here. Because once that military spending goes towards one avenue, but you lose everything else, and devalue your currency and everything else, and put all your eggs in one basket, we see the result of that. And so you start having these, I guess, this posturings, yelling. She goes to China to, I don't know what she's doing. First, I don't know what these people are doing, but the U.S. looks very desperate, and a lot of it is because they kind of gone away from what they were known for, which was the manufacturing base. And you talk all about that in your Substack and your videos. And I want to say thank you again, SL, for coming on to the show. And we can't wait to have you back on in the fall.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kiko. I really appreciate, and I really have a lot of fun chatting with you.
Yes, I know my audience will enjoy this, and we had quite a bit of laughter, and so even though some of the content is serious, you know, sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. I mean, some of the information we talked about isn't funny information whatsoever. I think the laughter is just kind of a reaction because it's unbelievable, really, what's going on in the world right now, and just there's really no other way to react. I mean, you can't make up this stuff that we're seeing that's playing out real time. But we will talk soon. Beautiful
Okay,
people
sounds
in
good.
India, beautiful people in the US and the rest of the world. Have a wonderful evening and morning. Cheers.
Okay, bye, Kiko.